everyone. My name is John Hicks, and this presentation will discuss developing reform in the Polish Foreign Service and its implications for the European Union. The Polish Law and Justice government published its draft Act on Foreign Service of January 12, 2021. The bill underwent multiple readings in the Sejm and committees before ultimately passing with 237 votes for, 213 votes against, and 4 abstentions on January 21, 2021, and is now under Senate and presidential review. Votes were cast almost entirely along party lines, with Law and Justice Party MPs comprising all but 2 of the yeas and nays coming entirely from opposition parties. The bill intends to restructure the Polish Foreign Service and increase national oversight. The PIS argues the reforms would better ensure that the diplomatic service follows the interests of the Polish people, with greater oversight and direction from the national government. The party argues that diplomatic agents must be held accountable politically on the domestic level, so they do not strictly represent international interests or their body's own, at the expense of the Polish citizenry. Included in the bill are provisions that would reduce mandatory training times for diplomats, abolish ambassador titles, potentiating directly politically motivated appointments within the Foreign Service, eliminate the Foreign Service's discretion over budgetary and capital matters, and most consequentially, the bill establishes the position of head of the Foreign Service, a new position nominated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs that exerts authority above the pre-existing Director General. The post of Director General was established in 2001 and has customarily been occupied by ranking diplomats with extensive ambassadorial experience. The proposed changes have met with the condemnation of independent bodies, including the Warsaw-based Conference of the Ambassadors of the Republic of Poland. The Conference of the Ambassadors was established in 2018 by former Polish diplomats to advocate against limitations on the independence of the Polish Foreign Service. The group was formed after years of encroachment on the civil service by the Polish political apparatus under PIS rule. It supports a heightened role of the Polish diplomatic force in EU and world affairs, as well as strengthened relations within NATO. The group contends that the bill would cripple the impartiality of the Foreign Service and subject ambassadors to meddling and co-optation by governing parties. The group is critical of the PIS government ostensibly straining relations, which it sees as a bulwark against Russian interventionist ambitions within the region. They view the crippling of the Polish diplomatic service as further alienating the state from its role in maintaining EU-NATO coordination. Simultaneously, the Polish Foreign Service had a critical stance regarding Russia. It joined other member states in retaliatory expulsions of Russian diplomats after Russia expelled foreign officials accused of conspiring with the pro-Navalny opposition protests, and the ruling government has championed anti-Russian sanctions targeting the annexation of Crimea and democratic protests within Russia. As a result, allegations of PIS reforms precipitating alignment with the Russian agenda are tenuous, with the discourse centered more around Polish withdrawal from foreign affairs, removing barriers to Russian aggression in lieu of active support. Situated within greater context, since the transition from communism in 1989, Poland has played a significant role in EU diplomatic affairs. Polish accession to NATO occurred in 1999, and it joined the EU alongside the Visegrad Group in 2004. The EU has previously been at odds with the right-wing and Eurosceptic PIS party, with tension escalating to the consideration of invoking Article 7 to suspend voting rights within the Council as a rebuke of the government's interference within its judiciary, among other concerns. Hypothetical exercise of the Article 7 treaty would be on the basis of the government alienating fundamental EU principles, of which a rule of law was considered jeopardized by the removal of separation of powers between the executive and judicial branches of government. However, this action would require unanimity throughout the EU Commission, which was not reached. The proposed Foreign Service reform comes as the latest in PIS attempts to leverage autonomy from the European Union, shifting the locus of natural control away from supranational institutions and independent domestic bodies alike toward the national government exclusively. Poland's buildup of its diplomatic apparatus has been integral to its post-communist era reforms. Not only did Poland invest in its diplomatic efforts to ingratiate itself to Western European states and NATO, the state forged a cadre of capable career diplomats apt to support the project. History of investment in intelligence and diplomacy buildup has translated to important Polish reforms in the contemporary EU external affairs, evident in the appointment of a Polish official to head a working group on the European External Action Service, or EEAS's security upon the body's founding in 2010, for example. However, development of intelligence personnel is itself an issue of contention for the PIS, who has presided over the ouster of numerous key diplomats as a result of their training, education, and experience of the pre-revolutionary communist government. The reforms bear wider implications for the EU as a whole, as because of Poland's leading role in the foreign policy. Poland is not only a prominent member state engaged in constant diplomatic interactions with a multitude of EU institutions, its diplomats are among those staffing the aforementioned EEAS. EEAS competences include the common foreign and security policy, intelligence surveillance, and global crisis and counterterrorism monitoring. Disruption of EEAS operations could incite systemic changes to EU coordination across the globe. The proposed reforms are emblematic of the tendencies of populist governments. Right-leaning governments throughout the world have often targeted diplomatic interactions with acerbic rhetoric and have gone as far as restructuring diplomatic agencies so as to neutralize their independent prerogative. It would appear that the PIS government aims to follow suit, relegating the Polish diplomatic force to a directly political alignment. If implemented, the proposed reforms could present a major challenge to EU solidarity. In order to administer its common foreign and security policy, the EU has relied on collective stewardship that presents a unified stance in international diplomacy. By subordinating the Director General and allowing for political manipulation of the Foreign Ministry, the partisanship can more readily co-opt foreign affairs, thus EU diplomatic institutions can become more difficult to manage. While it would appear excessively paranoid to think that one member state's diplomatic wing succumbing to partisanship threatens EU unity enough to risk a collapse of NATO-EU relations or deference towards Russia, as some critics posit, the precedent that this move sets could be serious for the EU in the long term. The move thus cannot be understood only on the domestic level. Like-minded populist governments in other states may look to emulate such reforms. With enough states contributing members disinterested in unified external policy, pluralistic division could compromise EU action. Such division could roll back the scope of entrenched EU foreign affairs competences, shifting autonomy to individual states with vastly different interests. Even states interested in unified policy could find consensus building difficult and be forced to pursue bilateral diplomacy outside of the EU. Polarization of the European Parliament, with the embrace of Eurosceptic nationalist parties, has already demonstrated the ability to immobilize certain legislative policy efforts of the EU. Allowing similar dynamics to seep into theoretically depoliticized chambers could lead to further difficulty maintaining a coherent and unified agenda. The EP is not regarded as a particularly effective apparatus for policymaking, but its pluralism has already proven capable of stifling EU initiatives. Allowing such disunity to express itself in supranational bodies like the EEAS could cause sufficient disunity to strain important international negotiations and security partnerships. State capture, the process by which institutions become compromised by non-impartial partisan oversight, is potentially antithetical to effective EU governance, which needs to entrust professionals and bureaucrats with their own tasks, unbeholden to the interests of individual states or their internal actors. State capture may be the very aim of the PIS's reform, similar to its restructuring of the judiciary. Moreover, as a member of the Visegrad Group, Poland is uniquely poised to foster integration of the Eastern European states with the other members of the EU. These states have at times been at odds with EU integration efforts, as is the case with Hungary, which in 2017 faced similar threats of Article 7 sanctions for its own policies. If the Polish Foreign Service is neutered by political channels, it is conceivable that this would draw Poland into further solidarity with the Eastern Bloc, reinforcing sectionalist divisions within the Union. This particular case serves to dispute the optimistic prognostications of such authors as Andrew Moravcsik, who have posited that nationalist parties and Euroscepticism have aired the grievance of their constituencies without actually threatening the structural integrity of the EU. Writing in 2017, Moravcsik argued that because it was unlikely that far-right parties would proliferate throughout the continental parliament, there was little reason to fear that the EU's decline will result from their recent ascendancy within EU members. Now, almost 4 years later, weaknesses in his intuition have manifested. Moravcsik may have been accurate in his assessment that Eurosceptic parties were preoccupied with certain issues such that they would have neglected core collective policies of the Union, sparing the single market and military coordination from attacks, but damage to the EU's preponderance does not always show itself in overt forms. The Polish diplomatic reforms case demonstrates how nationalist governments can use state capture on the domestic level to interfere with collective policymaking throughout the broader Union. By enabling itself as an interceding agent in routine interstate relations, the PIS can effectively hamper the EU's diplomatic efforts. It need not attempt to form a heavy coalition against the EU's foreign policy agenda, as reducing its own compliance and cooperation is meddling in cross-national institutions in and of itself. To illustrate the potential effects, one can see comparable dynamics playing out in other interstate affairs. In the context of Brexit, Moravcsik attributed fears of a hard exit to hysteria, noting that the May government's extensive trade negotiations with the EU in advance of Britain's departure would preclude the partners' irreparable economic ruin. Yes, the monetary union has endured, but unforeseen consequences have arisen regardless. For example, the British withdrawal has significantly challenged the UK's capacity to respond to the unanticipated coronavirus pandemic. Without participation in comprehensive EU policy, the UK's economic relief efforts have been strained by resource deficiencies and communicative discontinuities in coordination with the continental states. It would be inadvisable to think that the same could not hold in external policy. Just because the current climate is devoid of a monumental threat to EU coordination does not guarantee that a new crisis will not necessitate a thorough, unified European response. Such a coordinated effort to prevent the hypothetical outbreak of a war or levy humanitarian aid in response to disaster could be strained by politically motivated dissension within EU external affairs bodies. Thus, while Moravcsik and his contemporaries claims that Brexit and interstate tensions did not augur a mass exodus of member states, nor the dismantling of the EU competences have bore out, one cannot neglect the subtler ways that emergent nationalist movements can undercut EU policymaking initiatives, hamper time-sensitive collaboration on policy measures, and act as a bulwark against the further EU integration. Even one state retracting from diplomacy or negotiating in bad faith, let alone one of Poland's diplomatic status, is equipped to alter the supranational landscape as a whole. In summation, the proposed Polish Foreign Service reforms and comparable reforms that pretend state capture are a critical juncture for EU governance, as they underscore the capacity of member states to influence the nature of the Union just as dramatically as the latter can shape the former. Employing domestic avenues to alter the composition of supranational bodies like the EEAS and other diplomatic institutions showcases the leverage that member states can exercise throughout the Union, even when they do not venture beyond the purview of their internal bureaucratic infrastructure.